Hey everyone, today I've got a jazz piano improvisation for you to work on. It's based on a 16-bar chord progression in the key of F major, and what I'm going to do is play it through a couple of times myself, improvising in a fairly melodic style, and then afterwards break down exactly what I was doing in both left and right hands. So let's kick off by having a look at the chord progression we're working with here. As I said, we're in the key of F major. The progression is 16 bars long and we've got 4 beats in every bar, or you might say 4 beats in every measure if you prefer the US terminology. I've put this chart into a PDF, by the way, and you can download that using the link in the description text right underneath this video. Now, all of the chords that we can see here are pretty standard for a jazz progression. Most of them are diatonic chords. In other words, they are built out of the notes of the F major scale, the scale of the key that the progression is in. But there are one or two non-diatonic chords too, like A7 and D7 and B diminished 7, and they borrow notes from other keys, okay? And we'll talk about those later, because in the context of jazz improvisation, non-diatonic chords are quite important. By the way, for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm assuming that you can read basic chord notation, and if I talk about, an F major 7 chord or whatever, you actually know what that is. If you're just starting out or your chord knowledge is a bit shaky, I've put a couple of recommended tutorials again in the description text right underneath this tutorial. Now, a really important point is that those are the underlying chords of the progression. Those are the starting point that we use for improvisation. When we start improvising, we can change those chords and play around with them in basic ways. But we'll mention some of those when we walk through the progression, when we walk through the improvisation in detail in a few minutes. Now, before we think about all this fancy stuff going on in the right hand, I just want to have a little look at the left hand. People fret about their left hand when they start playing jazz piano, and they worry that they should do more with it. There should be more movement, more variety. A really good rule of the left hand is less is more. Yeah, you can do a little bit of bouncing about, a little bit of moving around, but just a small amount can have quite a good effect. So all I was doing there was playing shell chords. We'll come on to what those are in a second, and just something really simple, a simple rhythmic bounce. Sometimes I was simply playing a full chord for the full bar. Okay, just playing the chord and holding it. And that's enough to establish a rhythm. The right hand contributes to the rhythm as well. Sometimes, you can jump between chords. Okay, so there I had my bar of A minor 7. I was playing an adapted version, a changed version of the A minor 7 chord, a kind of A minor 11 there with some notes taken out. And I jumped from that inversion up to there. Okay, and again, that just creates a little bit of extra interest, but you don't absolutely have to do it. You also need to think about the particular inversions and voicings of the chords that you're using, the chord shapes if you like. By and large, if you're playing a left-hand a bass part that's slightly higher up the piano, you can fill in all the notes of the chord. But the further you go down, the more that risks sounding really muddy and unclear, because we've got, to look into the technical reasons for a second, we've got more audible overtones in those notes which fight each other. So we get that kind of more muddy sound. So up here, fine to play a solid chord. Once you get down here, what we do typically is play the shell chord. So there's the F major 7 chord, and we just take out the 2 middle notes, and that gives us a cleaner sound, but the root and the 7th of the chord is still enough to give us, you know, the harmonic information we need as listeners. Okay, so now the right hand. When I was playing through that improvisation a few minutes ago, I was playing a very melodic right hand, almost an artificially melodic right hand, because that melodic approach is, I think, the one that you will find best if you're just beginning to get into jazz piano. I could have done other things. I could have played splashy chords, I could have done fancy little runs and things like that, but I was very much focusing on the melody. And where that melody comes from is from a set of scales, really. Okay, so there were various scales that I was using there, things like the F major scale, the F pentatonic scale, the F mixolydian scale, the F blues scale, the whole tone scale starting on F sharp, and the C altered scale. So I was playing around with all of those scales, and from those scales actually I could use most of the notes of the piano keyboard. Yeah, there's a lovely line from Thelonious Monk, you know, the piano ain't got no wrong notes, and that's absolutely true. It's very much a case of pulling out the notes from those scales which are available to you, which you think are going to sound right at a particular time, and you can really play around. There were a couple of notes that I was being quite careful with. So the 7th degree of the scale is always a risky one. It's very unstable, and it can very easily drag you where you don't want to go. In other words, back to the tonic, okay, if you don't want to go there. I'm also a little bit careful about the 4th degree of the scale, which is also quite unstable and can sound just a little bit wrong against particular chords. There's no absolute right or wrong, okay, but the 4th is one to be careful of. That's why the pentatonic is so useful, because it misses out, it's basically the F major scale, but without the 4th and 7th degrees. I was also being very careful of the C flat or B natural, which turns up in the F blues scale. Now you would think, because I'm playing jazz, that the blues scale is a fairly natural place to go, and indeed it is, but that flat and 5th, which is what it is, the C flat, is a very harsh blues sound. And because the style that I'm playing in is much more kind of chilled out, it's kind of mainstream, it's kind of jazzy rather than bluesy, or purely more jazzy than purely bluesy, I want to be careful about that very hard edge sound. So just look what I'm doing there. I'm thinking about the scales in terms of the kind of sounds they give me. So my kind of safe, my straightforward major sound is the F pentatonic. If I want something more exotic or wildly exotic, I can go to the whole tone scale, as I think I did near the start of the improvisation. We'll have a look when we do the walkthrough in a second. But I can also draw on other notes. It's very much about knowing which scales give you the particular notes you need to create the particular sound you want to create at any given time. And a great deal of that involves using your ear. When I recorded that improvisation, I had my microphone turned down, and the reason it wasn't even attached. The reason for that was because I was singing along with myself. And that's a very common thing for jazz piano players to do. Yeah, I'm not saying it was very good singing, but it was approximate singing, and I was kind of, it's very hard to describe, I was kind of improvising with my voice and on the keyboard at the same time, and the two kind of reinforce each other. You will find, and it is worth trying this, if you sing along when you're improvising melody, it's much easier to give your melodies a much more natural shape. Okay, to create more natural and more satisfying phrasing. Have a go and you'll see what I mean. Now, if you're really, really new to jazz, obviously I can't just say to you, yeah, just improvise on this scale. It's easy, because it's not easy, because you really need to get into the field of improvisation. If you're in that situation, then do check out my beginner's series on jazz piano, because it does go through that. I'll include a link in the description text underneath this video. Basically, what you do is limit yourself. So you've got all these notes to play with, but when you're starting improvisation, you would just start with 2. For example, the F and the A flat, the root and the tonic and the blue third, the flat third there, and play that over the chord progression. And you can kind of build out from there. As I said, it's a whole methodology to itself, but that's the way you do it. Do look at my series on jazz piano for beginners if you want to learn more about that. Okay, now let's get the improvisation I played back on screen and just walk through it step by step and pull out some of the things that I was doing. So here I am back at the top of the improvisation, and what I'm going to do is just look at a few little bits of it to draw out some important points and show you how I've taken some of the theory that I've just been talking about and put it into practice. Most of the points I want to make are actually in the first 4 bars. I managed to cram them all in there when I was improvising, which took a little bit of work, but I did it. But let's just start off by reminding ourselves of those first 4 bars. Here we go. Straightforward. Now let's have a look at the left hand to start with. An important thing, I'm not doing too much. Yeah, it's really tempting when you start playing jazz piano to think, oh my word, I've got to do loads and loads in the left hand, I've got to look after the rhythm, I've got to do the harmony, I've got to do all this stuff. My left hand is actually moving far less than my right. Even though I don't have a rhythm section behind me, I'm not doing a lot there, and that is enough to create the sense of underlying pulse, of rhythm, of tempo, all the rest of it. While we're on the subject of the left hand, let's look at the actual chords that I'm playing there, again from the top. So there's F major 7 bar 1, as in the progression. There's G minor 7 bar 2, and I'm playing it in its 3rd inversion, F, G, B flat, D, okay. And there's bar 3, which should be an A minor 7 chord, but I'm playing this thing instead. Now A minor 7 would be A, C, E and G, or I could play it in another inversion, so it would be E, G, A and C. But I'm playing E, G, A and D. And what I've done here is take the A minor 7 chord, the basic A minor 7 chord, and extended it. And what I've actually done is create an A minor 11 chord. Yeah. Now, an important point, the full A minor 11 will contain the notes A, C, E, G, B natural and D. Okay. But I'm not playing all of those notes. Clearly I can't. I haven't got enough fingers, I haven't got enough reach. So what I'm doing is missing some out, and that's absolutely fine. If you play around with chords in your jazz progression, if you extend them in particular, you can miss notes out. Play around, experiment, you can get away with missing some out and not others, but the important thing to do is to capture the character of the chord, which is what I've tried to do there. Yeah, so really important point. A really important technique in jazz. I've taken the basic underlying chord and extended it. Let's move on. There's our B flat major 7, and then we have this. Okay, so we're now in the second 2 beats of bar 4, what should be, according to the chord progression, a C7 chord, but here I am playing a G flat 7. Yeah. Now this is an example of chord substitution, another very common technique in jazz. What I've done is take out the original C7 chord and replace it with another chord which has the same function, to use the technical term, which takes me back to the same place. It still has a dominant function. It wants to return me to the tonic at the start of the next bar, but it has a different sound, a kind of cooler, a kind of jazzier sound. Chord substitution is a huge subject. I can't go into it in its full details here. This is an example of the tritone substitution, which if you want to find out more about, do have a Google around. I've talked about it quite a lot in the past. I might even have a tutorial on it, but do a search for tritone substitution because it's a very, very common sound in jazz. So there we've seen chord extension and chord substitution, two of the most important techniques when we're dealing with jazz harmony. And again, in my series for jazz piano for beginners, I talk about extension and substitution quite a lot. Now let's go on and look at what's happening in the right hand here. Yeah, how I'm creating this right hand phrasing. Let's just have a listen. Now to start with there, I'm making things fairly straightforward for myself. I'm keeping my hand more or less in one position, and it's exactly the same as the position that the left hand is in, but an octave higher. I'm stretching to start with over an F major 7 chord. I've got that risky 7th note at the top there, which I did manage to work in. And I created my improvised melody there using different notes from different scales. At the start, I was mostly using notes just taken from the F major scale. Then I dropped in this A flat, which comes from the blues scale, the F blues scale. Then this E flat, again from the F blues scale, or it's from the F mixolydian mode. You know, various places you can talk about it coming from. You don't need to worry too much about the source of the note. It's the sound that's important, really important point there. But then at the end, I got kind of more exotic and used a little run down the whole tone scale. Let's just listen to that again. Again, a very common jazz thing. Here we go. There we go, just a little section down the whole tone scale, D, C, B flat, A flat, G flat, and back to the tonic, back to F there. What I'm not doing is saying to myself, right, now I will play the major scale, next it's the blues scale, next it's the whole tone scale. Rather, I'm aware of the sound that the notes from the different scales will make, and I'm kind of deploying those notes, you know, in terms of, you know, when I think I want to make a particular sound. So what the mental process that's happening is that my kind of conscious brain is saying, yeah, I want this kind of sound now, I want the major sound, or I want the whole tone sound. And then my kind of subconscious, which I've trained, you know, through doing a lot of practice to you know, to play around with those scales, goes for the right scale, goes for the right note, yeah? And that's where the singing comes in as well, because, you know, for some reason, when you've done a lot of practice, if you sing and play at the same time, it kind of reinforces and helps you get a good melodic structure and a good melodic sense. And you can't do that overnight. So one of the first things you need to do when you start playing jazz is to really familiarise yourself with those sounds, to experiment with the different scales, to limit yourself to start with, as I've said, to maybe just 1 or 2 notes, and just listen to the different sounds you can make. A really important point is when we have non-diatonic chords in the left. Okay, so for example, when we had the tritone substitution or whatever, or later on when we have notes like the chords like the A7 and the D7, people often think, oh no, you know, I need to change my scale in the right hand. I need to you know, suddenly I'm playing an A chord in the left, I need to use an A scale. And you don't have to. Let's just move on and look at how that actually works. So we're just going through that bars 5 to 8. There's that B flat 6. Okay, did you notice what I did there? Yeah, there's the A7 chord in the left, played in its first inversion, and I'm quite happily playing this C in the right, and it actually produced a really cool jazzy sound. Let's listen again. Yeah, lovely and bluesy. So I'm not worrying particularly about what I'm doing in the right being very heavily influenced in the left. I'm thinking along the flow of the melodic line, rather than thinking, I've got this chord, now I must play this scale, this chord, this scale, this chord, this scale. It's much more about a kind of you know, thinking about the flow of the line and seeing what sounds emerge from that. Okay, so if you want to play this improvisation for yourself, what should you do now? Well, the first thing to do is to download the PDF of the chord chart, which, as I said, is in the description text right underneath this video. Print it off and stick it on the piano, and just begin to get your head around these chords. If you just spend, you know, a few days or a week just playing through the chord progression, maybe just in your left hand, to really get a feel for it, then that will be handy. Once you have a feel for the chord progression, you can begin to play around in the right. As I've already said, if you're really new to jazz piano, then just stick to a couple of notes at first and gradually extend. And if you want a more detailed kind of way into the whole skill set of playing jazz piano, do check out my series of tutorials on jazz piano for beginners. I'll include a link once again in the description text underneath this video. So hopefully that was kind of useful and kind of fun and kind of interesting. More tutorials coming soon. In the meantime, please do subscribe to my channel if you haven't subscribed already. You just need to hit the red button in the bottom right hand corner there. Check out my social media and my Patreon crowdfunder. All the links for that are in the description text below. And please also check out my book, How to Really Play the Piano, the Stuff Your Teacher Never Taught You. I've got several books out, but How to Really Play the Piano is by far the most popular. You need to be able to read a little bit of sheet music, right and left hand, treble and bass clef, to really get the most out of it, but it will help you with stuff like chords, stuff like improvisation, the kind of things that typically you don't get in standard traditional piano lessons. So there we go. Hope you enjoyed that. I'll see you next time.